Chairman, members of the board, this is day 2 of DEQ's presentation on the proposed 401 water quality certification for Atlantic Coast Pipeline, certification number 17-002, and Debbie is passing out paper copies of my presentation. As I have done the last 3 days, there's a handy-dandy cheat sheet of acronyms used if you just would like to pull that out. So the purpose of my presentation today is to provide changes that DEQ has proposed to the 401 water quality certification that went to public notice in July of this year in response to comments. Provide to you responses to comments that are not covered by additional changes to the proposed certification. There are 7 major areas that we'll be discussing today: karst protection, the protection of private water supplies, water quality monitoring, erosion sediment control and stormwater management, the Corps' utilization of Nationwide Permit 12, protection of water quality standards, and then sort of an overall regarding blasting, steep slopes, and landside concerns. So, the first thing I'd like to talk to you about is in relation to karst protections. We received very early on after the ACP application was made to FERC, numerous comments from localities, property owners, and concerned citizens about the potential impact of building a pipeline in karst geology. We received numerous comments during the public comment period, and in fact, groups of citizens came and spoke to you at least 2 State Water Control Board meetings during public forum to also express concerns. We, DEQ, engaged a number of state and federal geologists to talk to us about the potential impacts to karst. And in fact, we convened a karst workshop earlier this summer out at VMI in Lexington. We had staff from the West Virginia Department of Environmental Protection. We had a representative from the U.S. Geological Survey who works out of one of the West Virginia offices. We had the Virginia State Geologist. We had Will Orndorff, who is staff to our sister agency, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, and he is the person that staffs the Virginia Cave Board and is considered to be one of Virginia's state experts on karst geology. And we also have some staff in our Harrisonburg office who are involved. And we spent a lot of time talking about karst and talking about potential water quality concerns regarding construction in karst. I came away from that session with 2 points. One is that the best thing to be done to protect karst is to avoid right-of-way construction over karst features, and that secondly, the most important thing to do is to have as best an understanding as possible about this underground karst hydrogeology and how the different features interact and interplay with surface waters. And that point is, and we heard about the Red Sulphur Springs public water supply. That was an issue where there was a spill on a pipeline construction site, and there wasn't adequate information as to where that spill was basically going to pop out of that system. So it ended up near the intake for the Red Sulphur Spring public water supply. So what we wanted to do was make sure that we had the best information possible for emergency planning and response. So What we have proposed as revisions to the July 2017 certification are a number of conditional additions related to karst protection. First, we are requiring that ACP update their karst survey report. There were gaps in the field surveyed information because they'd not been able to gain access. So we said, make sure you go out there and you do the field reconnaissance and you know where those features are. We asked them to revise their karst terrain assessment, construction, monitoring, and mitigation plan in accordance with FERC's order, which is requiring post-construction monitoring of the underground karst area using LIDAR, and that is to be able to understand the stability of that system once construction has been completed. We have required in the proposed additional conditions a supplemental karst evaluation. Requires that dye testing that I mentioned, and we relied on Will Orndorff at DCR to help us understand where those areas of additional dye trace testing need to be performed. I do want to mention that dye testing is currently underway. It has not been completed, so we don't have a final report, but I know that we've been getting some information from ACP's geologists as that work goes on. We also addressed a memo that we received from the Virginia Department of Health, which requested a survey of wells, cisterns, springs, and other surface water within 100 feet of the center line of right-of-way construction in karst topography. What we are requiring ACP to do is to conduct water quality monitoring of any landowners' well, cistern, spring, or other surface water that's used for water supply. And we are asking for a suite of water quality monitoring parameters to be taken, including total petroleum hydrocarbon, volatile and semi-volatile organic compounds, fecal coliform turbidity, total suspended solids, and pH. And the thought behind this is that the health department wanted us to have a baseline so we know the status of those water supplies. The survey and sampling is to be conducted if the property owner requests that it be done and if access is granted. Another thing that you heard a lot of speakers mention yesterday, and we received a number of comments about, related to the concern that if there were impacts to private water supplies, that either ACP LLC would not exist, it would not be an actual entity at the time that impact was identified, or that somehow ACP would not make good on the requirement in the FERC order to actually embark down mitigation for any of those impacts. So we are requiring ACP to provide financial responsibility demonstration of $5 million to support restoration of any impact to drinking water wells. It's a little bit confusing because if you dove into that proposed condition, we actually took the language for financial responsibility demonstration from another one of your regulations, because this is not something that you have a regulatory authority to require. So we modeled the demonstration on the kinds of financial assurance options there are in your regulation regarding the operation and closure of private sewage treatment plants. So it's new for us, but we did add that requirement. I have some information here just in case there are questions about what in fact Did the karst survey report include, and it requires identification and evaluation of karst features such as sinkholes, caves, sinking streams, springs, using both initial desktop information and then field reconnaissance. As I said, we require in the proposed conditions that ACP go out and update their karst survey report that was done some time ago before they had property access. In terms of the karst protection measures, one of the things that might be a little bit confusing is we talked about these same issues last week when we discussed the Mountain Valley Pipeline, but there are different names. The reports have been given different titles. And for ACP, it's called the Karst Terrain Assessment, Construction, Monitoring, and Mitigation Plan. And again, the basis of that really focuses on field inspections before and during construction by a karst specialist team, with the penultimate mitigation practice to avoid construction over karst features. But also involved in that are erosion and sediment control best management practices, wetland and stream crossing procedures, SPCC plan if there is an unintended accidental spill of petroleum or gasoline or something in the construction area, that is minimized and addressed, and then finally, if necessary, stabilization measures. In terms of that we have included in the proposed changes to the July 401 certification, I've really just repeated everything we just talked about under the protection of private water supplies, because when you looked at the comments and you heard it yesterday, the vast majority of folks who were concerned about their private water were in karst geology. So we have included the same conditions to address both that and the general area of karst protection, and that includes updating the survey report, updating the plan to include the post-construction LIDAR, the supplemental dye testing, the well surveys outside up to 1,000 feet off the center line, water quality monitoring, and financial assurance. Mr. Chairman, I think we usually do follow-up after a set of concerns, comments. Would you like to do that today, or shall I keep going?
With regard to the financial assurances, is that $5 million per occurrence, or is that $5 million just across the length of the pipeline?
It is $5 million across the length of the pipeline for disruptions that may occur related to construction in karst topography. So, for example, I believe the karst part of the pipeline for ACP is 30 for any of those. I think it's about 35. It's traveling through karst terrain. But I can get you the exact number if you'd like.
Is it? But it's for to support the restoration of drinking water wells.
Should there be an impact? Yes.
So is that drinking water wells only along that 35 miles? Or?
In karst topography, yes.
In karst topography.
Yes.
I think that might need to be specified in the letter and the condition. It's not the way it reads, it reads along the length of the pipeline.
I thought it said in karst topography, but I am happy to double check that, yes.
Okay, check it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, the survey and sampling of surface water features along the right-of-way, there was a lot of concerns raised yesterday by people who were saying that a lot of those features hadn't been identified or weren't located. Apparently a lot of them had been missed or overlooked. What kind of quality assurance is it going to be to try to make sure that all of those are taken into account? I mean, do we have a chicken and egg where the landowner has to come and say, I've got it on my property, or do we go and
that those features be surveyed. However, if a property owner would not grant access to that survey team, then we might not have actually been, or ACP might not have actually been out there to field verify. With the granting of the Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity, there are now other things going on in terms of granting or obtaining access for the surveys to look at those properties. But it needs to be field verified, yes.
But the certificate only allows them to access, if I understand correctly, the right-of-way area and the construction area itself. And if we're identifying surface water features 1,000 feet from the center line, obviously that goes outside the certificated area. And I'm just concerned that we're not getting into a situation where a lot of features are overlooked. And I'm not sure how we're going to deal with it.
Well, the survey out to 1,000 feet is tied to that property owner requesting and granting access. We do have some information. For example, we have a Virginia database of known springs. We have had our staff geologists as well as DCRs out there in the field to some extent, and I could actually have either one of them come up and discuss their knowledge of the features that are out there. It's tied to what we know in the field and if we can get out there and look at it.
Please do not shout out during the meeting and conduct will not be tolerated. If you continue, I will ask the police to move you from the building and we'll end up back there.
So one more question, Mr. Chairman, if you'll bear with one more. No? So for example, let's say we have a situation construction underway or completed, and a surface water feature is identified that hadn't been identified previously. How's that going to be dealt with? Is that going to be sampled, or is this going to put it on the radar?
So if we go back to slide 7, please. Yes. That plan encompasses the developer's requirements to conduct field inspections prior to and during constructions with a car specialist team. So they will, in addition to whatever other environmental inspectors might be out there during construction, there are car specialists that will be on site to run through that list of mitigation practices. We also know that there may be karst features which are not visible until clearing has occurred, tree clearing has occurred. So this team goes back out and looks again once tree clearing has occurred for the construction right of way, the laydown yards, all those access areas. So there will be, or there is intended to be, an evaluation. The other thing is that if there are folks, both the DCR geologist and our geologist have been available to folks. If they want us to go out and take a look, we can certainly try and accommodate that.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Mr. Chairman, if I may. Concerning the surveys of property that has not been able to be done, and you may have already said this, but for me to remember this, I don't. How many is left? Do you know how many people are their land survey or not willing to do that? I understand.
I am not able to answer that question, but there might be someone from ACP who can.
Okay, I'll make a note of that. Does anybody know?
Okay, so slide 10, please. Thank you. In the July proposed 401 certification, we included a condition that required ACP to conduct some additional upland monitoring. And the idea there was to gather some water quality data regarding upland activities in a few sensitive or critical areas. And let's go to slide 10. This was, 11. So the upland monitoring plan in the proposed certification required the development of, as I said, some limited water quality monitoring to evaluate impacts due to upland construction. The monitoring is to occur upstream and downstream of construction area and before and after construction. 3 samples are to be collected for each time period, with samples collected at least 1 week apart, and the included parameters are temperature, turbidity, dissolved oxygen, pH, and benthro macroinvertebrate surveys. We received a number of comments that was not an adequate water quality monitoring. It was not an adequate monitoring plan. So we spent some time talking about that and agreed. It is limited upland monitoring. That was what it was designed to capture. But we felt like DEQ needed to develop its plan with the goal to determine baseline pre-construction conditions in several sensitive areas or critical streams, and to really develop a comprehensive on the effects or lack thereof the proposed pipeline construction activities. So there's 3 components to our monitoring. We have contracted with the U.S. Geological Survey to install a number of continuous monitoring samplers. We, DEQ, have done some work on the biological communities related to benthic macroinvertebrates and physical habitat. We have contracted with a professor at VCU to do some work on the fish communities, and together, in fact, and I can't remember who commented, but we had a very specific comment from a recognized expert who said, you know, you need to do all this monitoring. And in fact, we had figured out we needed to do all this monitoring too. So for the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, we have 14 sites. We have chosen those sites based on proximity to upland construction activities, the presence of wild trout populations and/or threatened and endangered species, benthic macroinvertebrate community that indicates integrity, which means good water quality, proximity to public drinking water withdrawals, and areas where we have heard from the public and there was significant interest. As of November 20th, all of the real-time monitors have been installed. We have collected our pre-construction biological and habitat data, and in fact, the USGS is reporting in near real time the results of the water quality monitoring that their continuous monitors are collecting. And that is a sample of the additional of DEQ's water quality monitoring sites. Hey.
No comment.
Can you turn the light so we can see it?
You continue on that, please.
It's a question, we can't see it. We just want to see it.
Sorry.
So that we can see it. There.
Thank you.
Any questions on water quality monitoring?
Any questions from the board? Seeing none,
So we received many comments during the public comment period, and you heard a number of comments yesterday regarding how DEQ's review of erosion and sediment control and post-construction stormwater management interacts, or in some instances, folks assert fails to interact with the additional conditions in the proposed 401 certification. To some of the details on E&S, I just do want to mention that we in fact added a condition to the proposed 401 certification to make it clear that ACP must comply with all requirements of erosion sediment control and stormwater management laws and regulations. And the requirements to comply with those statutes and regulations are enforceable under both the 401 certification and each program. The other thing I wanted to mention is that land disturbance cannot begin until the project-specific erosion sediment control and stormwater plans have been approved by DEQ. So that is a prerequisite activity. I'm going to try and explain sort of the background in all of this, and I know it's generated a lot of confusion and allegations that you, the board, cannot provide 401 water quality certification unless and until DEQ has approved the plans, or maybe some folks suggested that you needed to approve the stormwater and E&S plans. What I'd like to walk through is how the statutory and regulatory at the state and the federal level. I also want to say that very, very early on, after the application for this project was filed, we received a number of communications from concerned citizens. Mr. Kirk Bowers, who spoke yesterday, the Dominion Pipeline, a number of localities in which this construction activity was going to occur. So let me just say that we, I believe, have gone well beyond the statutory and regulatory authority we have on E&S. And I'm going to try and step you through to see how we got there. So first of all, a 1,000-acre mixed-use development project, they'd have to get coverage under the construction general permit. Congress, however, exempted construction related to natural gas transmission pipelines from requirements to obtain a bit. So at the federal level, under the 2005 Energy Policy Act, Congress said that you don't have to get coverage under that permit. EPA cannot require you to get coverage under that permit, so that's reflected in our regulation. What we've done, however, is we have picked up and let me just say one more thing. If these companies, if ACP needed coverage under that construction general permit, we do not authorize coverage unless and until erosion and sediment control plans have been approved, unless and until post-construction stormwater management plans have been reviewed and approved, and unless and until the stormwater pollution prevention plan has been reviewed and approved. So if this project needed coverage under the construction general permit, all of those things are precedent to meet the application for coverage under that permit, but Congress has said they don't need, projects like this don't need to get coverage under that permit. So, what we have done is we have basically duplicated every requirement that is otherwise in the construction general permit and put it into the annual standards and specifications. So you don't have that 402 permit, you can't require that, but we have captured all of those requirements in the annual standards and specifications. And ACP's annual standards and specifications were approved by DEQ on July 5th, 2017. So, what does that mean? Traditionally, historically, for other pipelines that have been built heretofore at this date, annual standards and specs is where Virginia has stopped. We've said, okay, you have your annual standards and specs approved, go forth, develop your project-specific plans, make sure they comply with your standards and specs, make sure you comply with frequency of inspections, and basically go and do this. However, again, we heard a lot of comments about legitimate concerns that for a project of this size, there might be in simply approving annual standards and specs and turning it over to the companies to then involve in required to submit project-specific plans. We said you must. We sent a letter sometime in the spring of 2016 and outlined a host of additional requirements that DEQ is imposing outside and beyond the regulation. So we said you have to give us all your project-specific plans for, I say every inch, I say every foot, for every bit of land disturbance activity, whether it's in the right-of-way, whether it's access roads, lay-down yards and equipment storage areas, and stream crossings. So, we have this ongoing effort to get these plans, to review them, and to only approve them if they are consistent with your technical requirements under the erosion and sediment control regulation and the post-construction stormwater management regulation. You heard a lot of comments yesterday about how the plans are inadequate, the calculations don't meet post-construction phosphorus loads,